You've been told your whole life that you're too sensitive, that you feel too much, that you care too much. And somewhere along the way, you turn that into an identity. I'm an empath. It sounds like a gift. It sounds like evolution. Like you were built differently. More connected, more aware, more human than the rest. But here's what no one tells you. The most dangerous person in the room is often the one who believes they can feel everything. Not the narcissist, not the manipulator with the cold eyes, the empath. And if that sentence makes you uncomfortable, good. Stay with that. Because what we're about to get into is not about making you feel better about who you are. It's about showing you who you actually are. And that is a completely different thing. You know this person. Maybe you are this person. They're the one who always knows when something is wrong. Before anyone says a single word, they walk into a room and immediately feel the temperature. Who's tense? Who's hiding something? Who's about to break? They cry at commercials. They can't watch the news without carrying it for days. They absorb other people's moods like a sponge, and they can't figure out how to wring themselves out. They give, constantly, endlessly, often without being asked. They rearrange their schedule around other people's emergencies. They answer the phone at 2 a.m. They say yes when everything in their body is screaming no, because saying no feels like abandonment, and abandonment is the one thing they cannot survive. When someone hurts them, they don't get angry. They get understanding. They find the reason. They build the context. They make the excuse for the person who just broke them, because understanding the wound of others is the only thing that makes their own pain feel purposeful. People call them a blessing. Their inner world calls them exhausted. And in their relationships, especially the close ones, something quietly goes wrong. Again, and again, and again. They end up with people who take. They end up invisible. They end up doing all the emotional labor, carrying the relationship like a structure that will collapse the moment they put it down. And they end up resentful, then guilty for being resentful, then understanding about the guilt, then exhausted by the understanding. It's a loop, a very specific, very suffocating loop. And they never fully understand why, because they are the good one. They are the one who cares. How could the person who gives the most be the one creating the problem? Here's how. Empathy, in its raw, unexamined form, is not a virtue. It's a mechanism. And like any mechanism, it can be weaponized, especially by the person who carries it. The empath who has never examined themselves doesn't just feel people. They need people to need them. They don't just sense pain. They seek it, because pain is where they become essential. Pain is where they have a role. Pain is where they cannot be rejected, because who rejects the person who is saving you? They don't just give love. They give love as a form of control, keeping people close, keeping people grateful, keeping people in a state of gentle, invisible debt that ensures they will never fully leave. And they do all of this completely unconsciously. They are not calculating. They are not cruel. They genuinely believe they are only giving. That is exactly what makes it dangerous. The narcissist knows, on some level, that they are taking. The empath has built an entire identity around being the one who doesn't. They have constructed a self, a role, a function, a reason for existing, around being the one who heals, who holds, who stays. And that self-concept, that beautiful, noble, suffocating identity, is the first thing we need to look at. Because it is not who they are. It is what they learn to become in order to survive, and there is a name for that. There is a name for what the empath has built. Jung called it the persona. Not a disguise, not a lie, exactly, a role. A version of the self constructed for a specific audience. And Jung was clear. The persona is not the enemy. It begins as survival. A child enters a world they did not choose, with caregivers they did not select, in an emotional environment they had no power to shape. And that child learns. They learn what gets them love. They learn what triggers withdrawal. They learn which version of themselves keeps the room safe. And they become that version. Completely. Thoroughly. At great cost. For many empaths, the origin is not softness. It is fear. A chaotic home. A volatile parent. A childhood where reading the room wasn't a skill. It was a necessity. If I can feel what you're feeling before you know it yourself, I can prevent the explosion. I can make myself necessary. That child grew up. But the strategy didn't. It just found new rooms to read, new people to monitor, new relationships to manage from the inside out. And it called that love. Here's what that actually looks like. You give, and the other person feels grateful, but also vaguely trapped. You're always available, but somehow that availability starts to feel like pressure. You never ask for anything directly. But when they try to leave, everything gets heavy. That is not a coincidence. That is the mechanism operating exactly as designed. Jung called the buried part the shadow. Everything split off, pushed down, declared incompatible with the identity we needed in order to be loved. For the empath, the shadow holds everything they decided they are not allowed to be. Angry, selfish, controlling, needy, buried beneath layers of care and giving, until they could say with full sincerity, I am not that kind of person, and they believed it. But Jung understood something most people never confront. The more fiercely you deny a quality in yourself, the more powerfully it operates from the underground. Denial does not eliminate. Denial relocates. So let me ask you something directly, and I want you to sit with this before you answer. When someone you love tries to pull away, what do you feel first? Not what you tell yourself you feel. What actually moves through your body in that first unguarded second? If the answer is panic, not sadness, not disappointment, but panic, then what you're feeling is not love being threatened. It is a survival system being activated. And that system will do whatever it takes to keep the other person close, including things you would never consciously choose. The empath who refuses to see their need for control becomes controlling through care. The empath who refuses to see their anger transforms it into silence, withdrawal, the kind of emotional cooling that makes the other person feel they've done something wrong, without ever being told what it was. The empath who refuses to see their neediness builds relationships where others can never fully leave, because leaving would mean destroying the person who gave everything. That is not love holding things together. That is guilt, unconsciously constructed to function as a leash. None of it is conscious. That is not an excuse. It is the most important thing to understand, because you cannot dismantle what you refuse to see. This is the part that is difficult to hear, not because it is cruel, but because it lands in a place most empaths have spent their entire lives carefully protecting. Here it is. Most empaths are not deeply connected to others. They are deeply afraid of themselves. Feeling other people's pain is easier than sitting with their own. Fixing other people's problems is easier than facing their own. Being needed is easier than being known. The hypervigilance, that radar that never turns off, that constant scanning of every room, is not a spiritual gift. It is a nervous system that never learned it was safe to come home. Attention trained outward because turning inward was too dangerous. Inward meant the anger never allowed, the grief that had no witness, the needs that went unmet so long they were reclassified as weakness and buried. So the attention stayed outside, scanning, adjusting, managing. And that mechanism became an identity. And that identity became a relationship pattern that repeated itself across every significant connection they ever tried to build. From that unexamined place, every relationship becomes a performance, not a malicious one, but a performance nonetheless. I will be so present, so giving, so indispensable that you will never leave me. And if you do leave, it will be because you are broken, because no one has ever loved you the way I have. That thought, that quiet, devastating thought, is the shadow speaking, the need for control dressed in devotion, the anger dressed in sorrow, the terror of abandonment dressed in sacrifice. Until it is seen, really seen, it will keep running the show. Jung called the integration of the shadow individuation, the process of becoming whole, not perfect, not finished. Whole, meaning nothing essential left in exile. For the empath, this requires something that feels almost obscene, radical self-interest. Not selfishness, not cruelty, but the willingness to ask, honestly, what do I actually want? What am I getting from this dynamic that I've never been willing to name? It means letting people struggle without rescuing them, because rescuing kept you from asking why you needed to rescue in the first place. It means allowing anger to exist in your body without immediately transforming it into understanding. It means meeting the needy, frightened parts of yourself with the same compassion you've given freely to everyone else. The empath who does this work doesn't stop feeling. They start choosing, from compulsion to presence, from radar to actual contact, from performing care to genuinely being with another person, including the parts they cannot fix. That becomes possible, but only after one thing: the willingness to stop being the good one and start being a real one. If you've recognized yourself in any of this, not with shame, but with that quiet, specific shock of, oh, something important has already happened. Not because recognition is transformation, it isn't, not by itself, but because the shadow only has power in the dark. The moment you see it, not as an accusation, but as information, you change the conditions under which it operates. It doesn't disappear. That is not how this works. The patterns built over a lifetime don't dissolve in an afternoon of insight. The nervous system doesn't rewire because you watched a video and felt seen, but the patterns lose their invisibility. And that is everything, because you cannot choose differently from a pattern you cannot see. You can only repeat it, slightly confused each time, slightly more exhausted each time, slightly more convinced that love is just supposed to hurt this much. This is what the unexamined empath does. They move from relationship to relationship, or they stay in one for decades, and they keep encountering the same dynamic. The person who takes too much, the person who can't meet them, the person who eventually pulls away, or worse, stays and goes quietly numb, resenting the very care that was offered so freely. And every time, the story is the same. I gave everything. I was patient. I was present. I was devoted, and it still wasn't enough. What they cannot yet see, what the persona will not allow them to see, is that giving everything was never the point. The point, the unconscious, unspoken, carefully hidden point, was to never be in a position where they had to ask for anything in return, because asking means risking, and risking means the possibility of no. And no, the real no, the naked no, the no that isn't softened by context or explanation, is the thing the empath has been arranging their entire life to never have to hear. Every act of giving was also a wall. Every sacrifice was also a shield. Every "I don't need anything from you" was also a way of ensuring that they could never be truly refused because they never truly asked. That is not strength. That is a very sophisticated form of self-protection that has been mistaken for generosity. Shadow work does not make you invulnerable to that no. It makes you capable of surviving it. It makes you capable of sitting with the discomfort of wanting something and saying so out loud, without construction, without the elaborate emotional architecture designed to make refusal impossible. It makes you capable of being in a relationship where you are not the most giving person in the room, where the giving moves in both directions, where neither person keeps score, not because the score doesn't matter, but because neither one is terrified of what it might reveal. That is intimacy, not performance, not devotion deployed as control, not sacrifice that quietly demands to be repaid. Just contact. Two people present with each other, neither one managing the other from the inside, neither one disappearing into the other's needs, neither one loving from a place of fear dressed up as selflessness. That becomes possible. Not easily, not quickly, but genuinely, sustainably possible on the other side of this work. And here is what I want you to carry as you move through the rest of your day, back into the relationships and conversations this video may have just reframed. The sensitivity is not the wound. The sensitivity was the adaptation to the wound. And the wound, wherever it began, whatever shape it took, whoever was responsible for it, was never your fault, but it is your responsibility. Not to fix it perfectly, not to perform healing for an audience, not to become someone cold and defended who has traded one kind of armor for another, but to stop letting it make decisions for you while you stand to the side, convinced you are only loving. That distinction between loving and performing love is the whole game. And the fact that you're still here, still watching, still willing to sit with this, means you already know the difference, even if you're not ready to say it out loud yet. The next video goes deeper, the specific relationship patterns, the dynamics the unintegrated empath builds without knowing it, the roles unconsciously assigned, and the moment the whole structure begins to collapse, because it does collapse. And that collapse, as disorienting, as total, as terrifying as it feels, is not the end of something. It is the first honest moment, the moment the persona cracks and something real begins to breathe underneath. Stay close. The work is just starting.